Wang Yang-Ming, Idealist Philosopher of 16th-Century China, by Carsun Chang. Chapter 2. Wang Yang-Ming's System of Philosophy. The fundamental conviction upon which Wang Yang-Ming based his system of philosophy was a firm belief in the intelligibility of the world in which we live. An analysis of his doctrines may be given as follows. 1. Man's mind is the mind of the universe. 2. The mind's knowing is the core of reality. That is, reality is contained in consciousness. 3. Through knowing, the principles of everything can be found. Things are not external to us, but are objects of consciousness. 4. The universe is a unity in which man is the mind or center. Men comprise a brotherhood, and physical things show a spiritual affinity with mind. 5. If there were no mind or intuitive knowledge, the universe would not operate. 6. Matter, or the world of nature, is material for the mind to work with. Because of his ontological idealism, Wang does not recognize the Kantian distinction between noumenon and phenomenon, nor does he separate knowledge into the factors of the given reality and the organization of that reality by the mind, i.e., he does not separate knowledge into the sensation and the forms of sensibility and understanding. For Wang, the act or process of knowing and what is known are one reality. Reason is the fundamental essence, and reason is known through the activities of mind. Wang Yang-Ming's premise is the intelligibility of the world. Intuitive knowledge is not restricted to mankind, but extends to all animate beings, and even to inanimate beings. Man's intuitive knowledge, Wang said, is shared by grass and trees, stones and tiles. Grass and trees, suggestive of botany, stones and tiles, suggestive of physics, could not function if they did not possess the capacity to know. The universe itself would be incapable of running or operating if it were not for man's intuitive knowledge. Elsewhere, Wang comments, intelligibility fills the universe. Man, imprisoned in his physical body, is sometimes separated from intelligibility. Nonetheless, his intuitive knowledge is the controlling power of the cosmos and of the gods. If there were in the universe no intellect, who would study the mysteries of the heavens? If there were on earth no human intellect, who would study the profundities of terra firma? If the gods had no knowledge of mankind, how could they reveal themselves in fortune and misfortune? Heaven, earth, and deities would be non-existent if they were separated from the human intellect. On the other hand, if man's intellect were divorced from heaven, earth, and the deities, how could it exercise its functions? We cannot definitively say that Wang believed in hylozoism, the doctrine that all nature is alive, but something of the sort is implicit in his remark that because animals and grains are nourishment for men, and because herbs and mineral medicines cure diseases, there must be a spiritual affinity between the biological and physical worlds on the one hand and mankind on the other. That intelligibility exists at the core of the universe was Wang's prime conviction. At this core is man, intimately related to the supersensible world above and the world of nature below. The universe is a unity, with man at its center. Wang often quoted from the Cheng-Zhu, Doctrine of the Golden Mean. For example, it is said in the Shijing, Book of Poetry, that the hawk flies up to heaven, fish leap into the deep. This is an allusion to how the way is seen from above and below. Visible are birds flying in heaven, fish swimming in the deep sea. Much more lies beyond and in mystery. What is intelligible is that the whole universe is in harmony. The Chinese philosopher tells us not only what man is, but also what he should be. Wang Yang-Ming concludes, the great man is one who has a sense of unity with the universe. The great man thinks that the whole world is one family. While a man imprisoned in his physical body differentiates between you and me, his feeling is that of the petty man. Wang extends this sense of unity to inanimate objects. Sentimentality is raised to a philosophy. The doctrine that human beings have a sense of unity with the universe is not in the least the product of imagination. Rather, it comes from the sentiment of Zhen, human-heartedness. Indeed, this nobility is not only characteristic of the great man, but also holds true to some extent of the petty man. When one sees a child about to fall into a well, one is aroused by a sense of commiseration. This sense of commiseration makes one feel a unity with the child, who belongs to the same species as one's self. This feeling of commiseration goes further. When a man hears or sees an animal or bird crying or frightened, he also feels its misery. His Zhen, human-heartedness, leads him to a consciousness of unity with living beings. Further still, when he beholds a great tree falling, he feels, "What a pity!" His sense of wholeness thus extends to plants. In seeing a stone or brick smashed to pieces, a man has this same feeling, thus showing that his sense of integration reaches to inanimate objects. This sentiment of Zhen, human-heartedness, is rooted in man's nature. It is, at the same time, the intelligence of man and the quality which renders man intelligible. Also, it is the illustrious virtue of man. Someone asked Wang why, if this world is under the rule of love, or Zhen, the Ta Shui, great learning, finds it necessary to discuss the question of what should be done first and what should be done afterwards. The philosopher answered, "What is discussed here is the natural order of reason. For example, in regard to the human body, the function of the hands and feet is to protect one's head. But this does not mean that one should let one's hands and feet give one's head leisure by doing its work for it. Nevertheless, the natural order of reason should be so. Animals and plants, as previously mentioned, should be cared for by man. Yet, according to the natural order, plants should be given to animals as food. Animals and men alike should be loved, yet it is proper under certain circumstances to kill animals, especially for parents, guests, and as sacrificial offerings. Such is the natural order. Both relatives and strangers should be treated with solicitude, but when only one dish of meal is left, and when the case has to do with saving a life, the natural order requires that the dish should be given first to the relative, not to the stranger. This is the natural order revealed in intuitive knowledge. It is what is right. Wang's world is a community of conscious or moral beings living with animals and plants which possess spiritual kinship with it. This universe is teleological, for in it consciousness rules and moral values dominate. Wang taught that Zhen, human-heartedness, is the root of all other virtues. One of his disciples, referring to Cheng-Hao's words that a man of Zhen has a sense of unity with the cosmos, asked, if this remark of Cheng-Hao is correct, why was Moti's theory of universal love refuted by Mencius? The master replied, "This is a difficult question, and the solution depends upon one's understanding everything that is involved. Zhen is the expression of the principle of production and reproduction of living beings. Though the impulse to create is universal, its growth is gradual, step by step. After the winter solstice, the first yang comes forth, until in summer the yang is full. Because this impulse to create is gradual, it must have a beginning and then develop further. The process is like that of a tree which originally appears as a shoot, the first fruit of the creative urge. After the shoot there follows the trunk, and from the trunk emerges twigs and branches. If there were no shoot, there would be no trunk, nor any of the rest of the tree. Below the shoot, moreover, must be a root which can grow. In the root is life. Without the root, the tree would die. Love between parents and children and mutual regard between brothers are the first beginnings of humanity, and are analogues to the young shoots of the vegetable world. These first awakenings of love will later extend to embrace the love of all one's fellow creatures, who are, as it were, the twigs and branches. The sense of Zhen is, in other words, of the same nature as the root from which all beings have their origin. It is spiritual, yet also empirical. It is metaphysical and at the same time physical. This doctrine is an excellent illustration of how deeply the metaphysical theory of moral value is embedded in the practical life of mankind. The physical is rooted in a metaphysical truth. Wang's conception of the oneness of reality is nowhere more vividly expressed than in the following passage, which has to do with the universal function of the human senses. The eye of a man cannot stand by itself, is not sufficient unto itself, but must have the colors and shapes of all things of the world as its objects. The ear cannot stand by itself, but must have all the kinds of sound in the universe to listen to. The nose cannot stand by itself, but must perceive all the odors in the world. The mouth cannot do otherwise than to taste whatever is tasteful among all things. The function of mind is to know right and wrong concerning challenges and responses between all things and itself. Thus, the human mind is not only specialized in its various avenues to knowledge, but also it is open far and wide to all the phenomena of the universe. Wang Yang-Ming discussed his theory of mind from 2 points of view. 1. Mind in the naturalistic sense. 2. Mind in the normative sense. Often he combines these two views, beginning naturalistically and ending normatively. I have the idea to better myself. Why can I not do it? The disciple Xiao Hui complained. His master replied, explain in detail what your idea to better yourself is. My idea is to be a good man. Perhaps what I do is more for my physical than my true self, Xiao Hui continued. Wang Yang-Ming interposed. The true self cannot be separated from the physical self. I suppose that what you have done is not even good enough for your physical self. The physical self or body consists of the 5 senses and 4 limbs. The disciple said, I agree with what you have said. The eyes are fond of beauty. The ears delight in beautiful voices. The mouth craves delicious tastes. The 4 limbs take delight in comfort. These pleasures make me unable to control myself. Wang Yang-Ming continued, Beautiful colors blind the eyes. Beautiful sounds deafen the ears. Delicious tastes stop up the mouth with too much flavor. Racing and hunting drive one mad. All these delights are harmful to the eyes, ears, mouth, nose, and 4 limbs. They do no good to the senses, nor to the arms nor legs. If you care for your senses and limbs, do not give first thought to how your ears should listen, or to how your eyes should see, or to how your mouth should speak, or to how your arms and legs should move. If you can control your senses and bodily parts to conform to the Confucian rule that seeing, hearing, speaking, and motion should abide by the principle of decency, you will understand well enough what is good for your senses and limbs. But to bring your seeing, hearing, speaking, and physical movements into conformity with the principle of decency requires more than merely to leave them to your body. This accomplishment depends completely on mind. Seeing, listening, speaking, and motion are the work of mind. To be sure, your mind-directed vision operates through the organ of your eyes. Your mind-directed speech issues from your mouth. Your mind-directed movements are put into effect by your 4 limbs. But each of these functions is mind-directed. Otherwise, that is, if you had no mind, your senses and limbs would be unable to operate. Your mind, moreover, is not a nervous system of flesh and blood. If it were that and nothing more, a man, after death, while he still kept his flesh and blood, would continue to see, hear, and speak. I say that mind is the organ which directs seeing, listening, speaking, and motion, because mind consists of human nature, of heavenly reason. Since mind is so constituted, it has its essence, part of which is the virtue of Zhen. When the essence of mind, constituted as it is of human nature, works in the eyes, the function of seeing is operative. When it works in the ears, hearing takes place. When it works in the mouth, speech occurs. When it works in the limbs, movement ensues. All these are the operations of heavenly reason, which works in mind as master of the physical body. Mind, in its essential nature, is heavenly reason in the form of decent manners. This is your true self, controller of your physical body. This true self knows self-control even when nobody else is present, knows caution even when eavesdropping is impossible. In this discourse, Wang starts his discussion of mind at the naturalistic level and ends it at the normative level. In other words, he concludes his remarks with suggestions of what mind ought to be, rather than what mind actually is. Normatively, mind is reason. Here are 3 definitions of mind from Wang Yang-Ming's writings. The intrinsic quality of mind is nature, which is reason. There is no reason apart from mind. The essence of mind is goodness. From these definitions, Wang proceeds to illustrate the nature of mind. Mind is reason. How can you find reason apart from mind? How can you find so-called things outside of the mind? Suppose we talk about service to your parents. How can you find the reason for filial duty in the body of your parents? The reason for filial duty can only be found in your own mind. Suppose we discuss the sense of loyalty. How can you find the reason for loyalty in the body of the king? The reason for loyalty can only be found in your own mind. Or suppose we talk about friendship or the people's ruler. How can you find the principle of honesty in your friend's body, or the principle of benevolence in the people's body? The principles of honesty and benevolence can only be found in mind. When mind is clear, in the right, and unblinded by selfish motives, it acts towards parents in accordance with filial duty. It acts towards the king in accordance with loyalty, and it behaves towards friends and people at large in accordance with honesty and benevolence. Such is the meaning of Wang's maxim, mind is reason, a maxim which we have seen originated with the philosopher Lu-Wang. Wang Yang-Ming followed in the footsteps of his illustrious predecessor, and in so doing, moreover, deviated from the orthodox tradition of the school of the brothers of Cheng and Chu. According to this older tradition, Xing, human nature, is reason. The Cheng-Zhu school held tenaciously to the 2-level theory of mind, regarding the upper level where reason is stored as Xing, human nature, and the lower level, occupied with awareness and consciousness, Xin, mind, in the naturalistic sense. It would be wrong to assert that Lu-Wang and Wang Yang-Ming abandoned the 2-level theory in toto. Rather, they fused the 2 levels into a single unit mind, because reason must be expressed through mind, in particular through the thinking process of mind. It is no exaggeration to call Wang Yang-Ming a follower of Lu-Wang. In the doctrine that mind is reason, the theories of the two philosophers are identical. However, Wang's system as a whole is more comprehensive and precise than his predecessors. The theory that mind is reason developed into a richer fullness of meaning in Wang's system. The term intuitive knowledge has occurred several times in the exposition of Wang Yang-Ming's teachings. The Chinese words for intuitive knowledge are liang-qi, signifying the innate faculty of knowing. With our Chinese philosopher, the terms knowing, moral consciousness, and intuitive knowledge coincide in meaning. Liang-qi, comments Wang, whether by ordinary man or by a sage, is the same. It means conscience, or the concomitant knowledge. Liang-qi, through the ages past and through the ages to come, has remained and ever will remain the same. Liang-qi exists always. If you do not take care to preserve it, you will lose it. In itself it is bright and clear, despite ignorance and blindness. If you do not know enough to keep it clean, it will become beclouded. But though it may remain thus beclouded for a long time, it nonetheless is essentially brilliant, limpid, and distinct. In Wang's view, liang-qi is part of reason or reality. Knowing, he said, is the spiritual part of reason. Liang-qi is what is intelligent, clear, and distinct in heavenly reason. Elsewhere, liang-qi is heavenly reason. Again, when there is motivation, it is known to liang-qi. Regardless of whether motivation is for good or evil, it is known to liang-qi. Liang-qi is your personal criterion. When your will works in a certain direction, liang-qi knows whether it is inclined toward right or wrong. Liang-qi is as bright as a mirror. Nothing that is reflected in it can escape it. Thus far, the quotations from Wang Yang-Ming about liang-qi show it as working out the functions of pure and practical reason. But if we look at liang-qi from another angle, we shall find that it is as aptly described by a quite different quotation from Wang Yang-Ming. Thus, when your mind is full of wicked motives and they are known to liang-qi, it can stop them. In other words, when you entertain a good motive, liang-qi can develop it. When you entertain an evil motive, liang-qi can block it. In this passage, liang-qi appears as will. Wang Yang-Ming also presents liang-qi as an emotional factor. Liang-qi is a truly good heart. Also, when you see a child about to fall into a well, you feel pity and try to save the child. This is liang-qi. The universe is a unity. The sufferings of the people are the same as disease in your own body. If you do not feel discomfort from disease in your own body, it is as if you had lost your ability to discriminate between right and wrong. The expression liang-qi may be translated as intuitive knowledge. Wang Yang-Ming borrowed this term from the Mengzi, Book of Mencius. The passage in which it occurs is well worth quoting, for it throws additional light on the meaning of the expression. The famed second sage had this to say: "The ability possessed by men, but without having been acquired by learning, is intuitive ability. Babes in arms all know to love their parents. When they have grown a little, they all know to love their elder brothers. Filial affection is the working of Jen, human-heartedness. Respect for elders is the working of Yi, righteousness. There is no other reason for these feelings. They belong to all under heaven." Liang Neng, intuitive ability, or Liang Qi, intuitive knowledge, might be interpreted by some modern schools as instinct. In Wang Yang-Ming's system, it is a philosophical concept covering the three aspects of conscious life: intellect, will, and emotion. Many philosophers, including Locke and Hume, have based their philosophic systems upon knowing or understanding or cognition. Less often are systems constructed upon the human will. Yet Schopenhauer, who was much influenced by Buddhist teachings, did just this. Wang Yang-Ming, although he placed emphasis on intuitive knowledge as shown in the passages quoted above, was scarcely less emphatic in describing the philosophic role of the will. Wang stresses true or real will. With his usual clarity, Wang says that whenever there is any movement or prompting in the mind, the will is responsible. The way to control the will is to entertain virtuous motives and to eliminate wicked motives. This results in the creation of true or real will. One implication of this theory of the true or real will is correlated with knowing. Any prompting of the will is known to liang-qi. Wang skillfully elucidates this proposition. When the will is on the move and a motive is bad, most people will not attempt to stop it, because they suppose that since the motive has not yet been put into practice, it has no consequence. According to my doctrine of the unity of knowing and doing, even a prompting of will is a doing, so it should be stopped at once. According to Wang, then, if a vicious motive can be cleared away, then will, while still at the early stage of motive, can be put on the right track before it has realized itself in action. To the subject of will, Wang has much to contribute. In his answers to questions concerning the book Ta Shui, he wrote, "Mind, in its original nature, is pure and good, but when it is agitated by motivation, it can be either good or bad. So-called rectification of mind entails the idea that when a motivation begins to stir, it should be controlled in the interest of steering toward the right track. When motivation is good, one should embrace it in the same way that one loves beauty. When motivation is evil, one should hate it as one abhors a foul smell. Then motivation will be pure and virtuous, and mind will be rectified." The differences between the doctrines of Chu Shi and Wang Yang-Ming are plain enough. The earlier philosopher, a pillar of Confucian orthodoxy, stressed the aspect of seeking knowledge with reason. Only after one has acquired much knowledge is it possible to distinguish between right and wrong. But the later philosopher-strategist, Wang Yang-Ming, followed Mencius's doctrine of liangqi in asserting that when one applies liangqi, that is, conscience, to one's motives and will, one knows the difference between right and wrong, and the mind is ipso facto rectified. In Wang's system, emphasis is placed upon the close connection between willing and knowing. Wang wrote, "When motivation is known to liangqi as good, but when nonetheless one cannot embrace it but turns instead to the contrary, this means that one takes the bad as substitute for the good and is deaf in spite of the dictates of liangqi. On the other hand, when motivation is known to liangqi as bad, but when nonetheless one cannot afford to avoid it but on the contrary puts the bad into practice, this again means that one takes the bad as substitute for the good and is deaf in spite of the dictates of liangqi. Liangqi, of course, knows that it is bad. In these two cases, what is called knowing turns out to be ignorance or deception. The proper way to begin is to make the will real or true. Wang's meaning is that if you act in conformity with liangqi, your will is true. Otherwise, your will is untrue to your conscience. Wang says further, when liangqi's dictates are followed, this means that there has been no deceiving of liangqi, and that making true the will has been achieved. It is clear how intimate, for Wang Yang-Ming, is the connection between liangqi and volition. When Wang Yang-Ming discusses the theory of knowledge, we find him in full possession of the epistemological problem. The key to his system is the thesis that things are objects of consciousness. As long as we consider entities to exist outside ourselves and to occupy positions in space, the physical world and the mind are separate, and their unity is inconceivable. When, on that memorable night in Longchang, Wang made the discovery that so-called things are objects of consciousness, he found a way of linking the mind and its object, thus laying the epistemological foundation for his philosophic system. Just as Berkeley and Kant wondered how scientific knowledge of the external world is possible, so Wang asked, how are cognition and a recognition of moral values possible? It happened that the Chinese philosopher discovered that any knowledge, whether of the external world or of moral values, must first exist as consciousness in mind, and pass through the process of being thought about in order to become knowledge. In order to clarify Wang's theory that things are objects of consciousness, consider the following from a letter he wrote to Ku Tongqiao. Chu Shi's exposition of the phrase investigation of things is that principles should be studied out of things. If this were so, principles can be found only in things themselves. Then mind would be at one end and the principles of things at the other end. There would be disunity between mind and things. Let us assume, for the sake of argument, that Chu Shi's doctrine that principles are only to be found within things is sound, and let us then consider the principle of filial duty. Is this principle to be found in the bodies of your parents, or is it to be found in your own mind? If the principle exists in their bodies, it will disappear after their death. Or let us consider the principle of commiseration. In the case of the child falling into the well, does this principle exist in the child's body or in my mind? Shall I save the child by my hand? Ought I to follow the child to the well? These examples, the principles of filial duty and commiseration, are only two, but any number of other principles may be analyzed in the same way. Thus, to take the view that a disunity obtains between mind and things is to err. According to my teaching, realization of knowledge and investigation of things means that I myself apply my own liangqi to different entities. My liangqi knows what reason is, knows what is right and what is wrong. When I apply my liangqi to different entities, they become adjusted in a proper manner. Application of liangqi to different objects means realization of knowledge. When different things become adjusted in the sense that they function in their proper way, this is the work of the investigation of things. Here is another relevant comment made by Wang Yang-Ming in answer to someone who questioned his doctrine that things are objects of consciousness. Once, when the philosopher was on an excursion to Nanchen, a friend said, "According to your theory, existence is impossible outside of mind. But consider a flower which blooms and withers by itself in a valley. What has it to do with mind? Wang replied, before you see the flower, both you and the flower are in a state of isolation. When you see the flower, its color and shape become clearer to you, which means that knowledge of the flower cannot exist apart from mind. For Wang Yang-Ming, the importance of the knowledge which consciousness or mind provides does not lie in its being subjective, but rather in its having metaphysical significance. This is obvious from the following conversation with Chu Pensu, who remarked, "Man is intelligent because he has liang-qi." "But," inquired Chu Pensu, "do plants, stones, and bricks have liang-qi?" Wang answered, "Man's liang-qi is one with the liang-qi of plants and stones. Without man's liang-qi, plants and stones would not work as plants and stones. Not only is this the case in regard to plants and stones, but the universe itself would not work save for man's liang-qi." Wang's last remark tells us clearly that our knowledge of the world is a construct of our minds, a formation brought into being by our process of thinking. In this construction, there is a difference in opinion between Zhu Xi and Wang Yang-Ming. Though the older philosopher, according to Chinese tradition, concerned himself almost exclusively with moral values, nonetheless, he took a scientific attitude toward the world, studying nature critically. Moreover, his approach led him to separate mind from the physical world in space. Wang Yang-Ming, in the first period of his intellectual development, followed his predecessor insofar as his contemplation of bamboo seems to have presupposed this duality between mind and its objects. Later he realized that this method could lead nowhere. After much pondering, during his exile in Longzhang, he reached the conclusion that since things must come to the mind as objects of consciousness, whether they are constituted by our conceptual forms, it follows that so-called principles exist in our minds, not in the external world. Wang called this remarkable conclusion the unity of mind and the principles of things. Some examples of Wang's philosophy of monism show how his ideas are combined in a systematic manner. To be sure, Wang's monism is idealistic in the metaphysical sense, but the term as applied to his doctrine has a wider and more general significance than this somewhat specialized meaning. His interpretations are monistic when he resolves the dualism involved in the following problems. A. The individual versus the universe. B. Mind versus the physical world. C. Mind versus body. D. Desire versus reason. And E. Knowing versus doing. A. The individual versus the universe. This problem has already been solved in our discussion of Wang's metaphysics. However, another quotation is worth citing. An inquirer after truth pointed out, "My body as an organ is made of flesh and blood. Thus it is a unit. But such is not the case with the bodies of two persons. The separation between men and animals and plants is even more drastic. How can we say that these are one?" Wang Yang-Ming's reply is found in his Answers to Questions Concerning the Book, Ta Shui. A great man is one who feels that he belongs to a unity which includes the universe and the different kinds of beings. When a man sees a child about to fall into a well, he has the instinct of commiseration. This is his sense of human-heartedness, and it is this which makes him and the child one. Still, someone may say that man and a child constitute a unity only because they belong to the same species. However, when a man sees trembling and frightened birds and animals and hears their cries, he has a sense of pity for them. It is this which makes him one with them. Or someone may say that this unity exists only because birds and animals in common with men have feeling and sense. Nevertheless, even when a man beholds falling trees, he knows pity, and it is this which makes him one with plants. Someone may say again that this unity is derived from the fact that plants, like men, are living organisms. In answer to this, we may point out that even when a man sees stones and bricks being broken up, he feels pity. This constitutes his oneness with physical objects. This sense of oneness with the universe is a gift of nature and is conferred by heaven. It is in itself bright and intelligent. B. Mind versus the physical world. Wang Yang-Ming is not interested in discovering whether knowledge is based on sensation, on forms of understanding, or on both. Such an inquiry has no place in his thought because, as a Chinese, he is primarily concerned with moral values. He believes that reason is constituted by the inborn virtues of Zhen, human-heartedness, Yi, righteousness, Li, decency, and Qi, wisdom. These are forms of moral judgment or valuation. He believes that reason can be clouded only by desire and selfish motives. As long as mind is kept free of these obscuring agencies, it will be as bright as a mirror, and will show correct principles. Wang stresses the idea that there is no reason outside of mind, since if reason is to be a conscious reality, it must pass through mind. This school, identifying mind with reason, opposes the school of knowledge-seeking, that is, the school of Jushi, which emphasizes the acquisition of knowledge from outside. For Wang Yang-Ming, reason is inborn with mind and is the foundation of all. When the mind is clear and unselfish, there is reason. C. Mind versus body. It is interesting to examine the way in which Wang described the relation between body and mind. One day the master told the disciple that body, mind, will, knowing, and things were identical. The perplexed pupil asked why this was so, whereupon Wang Yang-Ming gave the following explanation. Ears, eyes, mouth, nose, and the 4 limbs make up the body. If there were no mind, how could the functions of hearing, seeing, speaking, and moving take place? Suppose that mind wished to hear, see, speak, and move. How could it do so if there were no senses or limbs, that is, if there were no means of exercising these functions? Consequently, no mind, no body. And conversely, no body, no mind. What occupies space is called body. The power that controls is named mind. Mind operating by motivation is will. When will works in an intelligent, clear, and distinct manner, or when its state is that of intelligence, clarity, and distinctness, mind is then said to know. That to which will is directed is an object, or thing. These different kinds of mental activity, willing, knowing, objects of consciousness, become one. Elsewhere, Wang expresses the same thought in different form. Rectification of mind, making the will real, realization of knowledge, investigation of things, all aim at the cultivation of the person. The last of these steps, the investigation of things, covers the whole field of self-discipline which can be worked out in all psychological activities. By investigation of things, Wang means examination of objects in one's own consciousness, examination of objects to which will is directed, and examination of objects being known. Rectification of mind means correcting the mind in regard to the object of consciousness. To make will real means to be true in will with respect to the objects to which volition is directed. Realization of knowledge is attainment of the knowledge of an object in one's own consciousness. From the point of view of psychology, according to Wang Yang-Ming, between what is inside and what is outside the mind, there is no division. Reason is one and the same, though it passes through many stages. Where reason is collected, it is called Xing, nature. As the matter of such collectedness, reason is called Xin, mind. When the master operates by directing himself, there is will. When the operation is clear and distinct, that is intelligible, there is knowing or cognition. The target at which the intellectual process aims is an object. D. Desire versus reason. For ages, Chinese thinkers have assumed a division between human desire and heavenly reason, between the human mind and the mind of Tao. Wang Yang-Ming, however, opposed this division and maintained that there is but one mind in the universe. When the human mind is pure and rightly directed, it becomes, or rather is, the mind of Tao. When the human mind is beclouded with personal desire, it is not the mind of Tao. With the Cheng brothers, Wang interpreted human mind as desire and the mind of Tao as heavenly reason. Moreover, he held that these two phases of mind are mutually exclusive. Wang's point of view is not peculiarly Chinese. Indeed, the common conviction of mankind has been that it is desire which shackles and blinds the mind, making it ignorant. The way to be free of desire is to purify the mind and to attain the mind of Tao. Discussion of this sort between Wang and his students, expositions on various kinds of psychological activity, reveal his monistic point of view and how greatly he was at variance with his predecessor, Chu Shi, whose thought always proceeded on a dualistic basis. Realization of knowledge and investigation of things, advancement of learning, and spiritual nurture. Wang's method of overcoming dualism is clear. A pupil of Wang cited the following words of Chu Shi: "The master key to a man's learning is mind and reason." He then asked Wang what he thought of this statement, and Wang replied, "The conjunction 'and' is a mark of Chu Shi's theory of bifurcation." Thus, Wang Yang-Ming opposed dualism even in such a small detail as the use of the conjunction 'and.' He realized that Chu Shi's use of 'and' implied that these two things were separate, and therefore irreducible to unity. Wang held precisely the opposite view. The philosopher-strategist's attack on the Chu school is illustrated in another conversation. One of his disciples quoted Chu Shi's teacher, Li Tung, or Li Yanping, in conformity with reason and unselfish, and asked Wang, how can one make a distinction between the two phrases, in conformity with reason and unselfish? Wang replied, "Mind is reason. If it is unselfish, it is in conformity with reason. Not to be in conformity with reason is to be selfish, so there should be no disunity between mind and reason." In short, Wang Yang-Ming's philosophy is a reaction against Chu Shi's dualistic philosophy. E. Knowing versus doing. The theory of the unity of knowing and doing does not necessarily have anything to do with monism. It has a value in its own right, and a thinker who opposes the doctrine of monism may still subscribe to it. First advocated by Wang during his exile, the theory was later reframed in the formula realization of Liang Qi, which expresses the same idea in a more direct way. Wang's conversation with his disciple, Shu Ai, has been set forth in the biographical sketch. A section from a letter to Ku Tongqiao, which forms a part of the book Records of Instructions and Practices, treats of the same subject in somewhat different form. In this work, the correspondent Ku states, "You advocate in your letter a parallelism between knowing and doing without giving priority to one or to the other. In this your meaning is the same as that of the chapter upon the supremacy of moral virtue, and seeking after knowledge in the Chong-Yung, Doctrine of the Golden Mean, where virtue and knowledge are represented as interpenetrating each other. Yet there must be some order in which the steps are to be taken. You must know how to eat before you can eat. You must know how to drink before you can drink. You must know about clothes before you can dress yourself. You must first know about roads, then you can walk. You must first know things, and then you can act. I do not mean to say that I should know today and then do tomorrow." This passage, which obviously contains implied criticism of Wang's doctrine of the unity of knowing and doing, elicited the following reply from the master. "You admit the parallel way and mutual interpenetration, yet you make mention of a proper order of steps to be taken. Herein you show a conflict in your mind. Let me take your example of eating and explain that to you. You are laboring under the customary way of thinking. In my view, one must first have the intention of eating, and then knowing how to eat will follow. This intention to eat is will, which is the beginning of doing. The taste of food is knowable only after it has been placed in the mouth. How can you possibly know whether something is tasteful or not until you have tasted it? Similarly, there must be the intention to walk first, then knowledge of roads will follow. The intention to walk is will, which is the beginning of doing. After you have plodded on some distance, you will know whether the road is safe or not. How can you possibly know the character of the road until you have walked it? The same type of analysis is applicable to drinking and dressing. Your argument only amounts to what you say it is, namely, you must first know things, and then you can act." Ku Tongqiao was not yet satisfied with his master's elucidation. "Real knowing is for the sake of doing. Without doing, there is no knowing. As a piece of advice to students that they should know the importance of putting knowledge into practice, your dicta are sound. If, however, you mean to say that doing is knowing, I fear that this superabundant emphasis on mind must lead to overlooking the principles in things and to incompleteness of knowledge. And such an interpretation is contrary to the theory of the unity of knowing and doing as entertained by the Confucian school." Then Wang Yang-Ming presented his second rebuttal. "What is true, intimate, serious, and substantial within knowing is doing. What is intelligent, alert, analytic, and discriminating within doing is knowing. Knowing and doing according to their original nature are inseparable from one another. In these later days, they have become disconnected because they have lost their primal significance. Therefore, I advocate the parallel ways of knowing and doing, which means that true knowing constitutes doing, and that without doing there is no knowing. This may be proved by the example of eating, as discussed by us previously. Of course, this is advice for students, but the advice is such in the original sense of the terms knowing and doing. It is not mere fabrication on my part in order to get immediate results. In your letter you said that overabundant emphasis on mind would lead to overlooking the principles in things. In my view, however, the principles in things cannot be found outside of mind. The attempt to find the principles in things outside of mind issues in one result only, namely, finding no principles. On the other hand, if you advocate putting aside the principles in things in order to find mind, then I do not know what remains to constitute mind. The intrinsic quality of mind is nature, which is nothing other than reason. When one possesses a mind exhibiting love to one's parents, there also is the principle of love. Otherwise, if there were no such mind, the principle of love would be non-existent. When one possesses a mind showing loyalty to the king, there also is the principle of loyalty. Otherwise, such a mind not being there would entail the non-existence of the principle of loyalty. Thus, reason or principle cannot be found apart from mind. Chu Shi's formulation was that the key to a man's learning is mind and reason. According to my view, though one's mind is confined to oneself, it is nonetheless the key to all principles. Principles are distributed throughout all things in the universe. yet they are comprised in one's mind. Juxi's formula bifurcates mind and reason, as is shown by his use of the little word and. The search for reason conceived as being apart from mind leads to incomplete knowledge. In olden times, Cao-Tzu taught that righteousness, can only be found externally. Cao-Tzu's doctrine was an ancient version of the theory of the externality of relations. Mencius then proceeded to criticize him, saying that Cao-Tzu did not understand the nature of righteousness. Mind is one. It is Zhen when it shows true commiseration. It is Yi when it exhibits honor and rectitude. It is Li, reason, when it reveals tracings or lines in systematic arrangement. If human-heartedness and righteousness cannot be found outside mind, how can reason be found there? The expectation to find reason outside mind is based upon the assumption that knowledge is separate from action. If, on the other hand, you seek reason in your own mind, this will lead you to perceive the unity of knowledge and action, the oneness of knowing and doing, which is the true way of the Confucian school. Wang Yang-Ming tried to apply his doctrine that mind is reason to every aspect of his philosophy. But Ku Tungqiao was so bound up in the conventional way of thinking that he was utterly blind to the possibility of synthesizing knowing with doing. Ku could do no more than remember the 5 steps in the Chung Yung, Book of the Golden Mean. A. Study widely. B. Question carefully. C. Think thoroughly. D. Analyze clearly. E. Put into practice earnestly. And in his correspondence with Wang, he quoted the first 4 steps, but omitted the 5th, that which has to do with doing or action. His reason for this omission was, of course, that from his point of view, practice belongs to action and as such is irrelevant to the process of knowing. In a letter to Wang, Ku wrote, "The mind of man is originally distinct and clear. Nonetheless, it is sometimes beclouded and blind because it is imprisoned in the physical world and is enthralled by human desires. The steps, studying, question, thinking, and analyzing, are necessarily preparatory to the clear understanding of reason, with which comprehension comes the discovery of good and bad, true and false." To this comment, which implied a criticism of Wang's teaching, the philosopher-strategist made the following reply. Questioning, thinking, analyzing, and putting into practice are all necessary to the pursuance of study. Without practice there can be no study. If one is to learn the duties of filial piety, one must know how to serve one's parents, and the only way to gain this knowledge is to do the labor oneself. Filial piety cannot be learnt by mere talk. Again, if one wishes to learn archery, one must have a bow in one's hand, and one must actually shoot an arrow to hit the mark. Or, if one wants to learn calligraphy, one must have paper on the table. One must hold a brush and dip it into the inkstone. Whatsoever the nature of the learning, one cannot acquire it without somehow combining it with practice. Therefore, the initiative of learning is practice or doing. Such is the meaning of the dictum, "Put into practice earnestly." Why does learning include these steps? During the process of learning, one has doubts. Hence, one questions. Questioning, then, is a phase of learning and practice. But going along with questioning is thinking. Thinking, thus, is also a phase of learning and practice. After questioning, one will analyze. Hence, analyzing is a phase of learning and practice. Whether one questions, thinks, or analyzes, one works ceaselessly with the subject. This is to put into practice earnestly. The point is not that practice comes after these 3 steps. To gain knowledge of a profession is called to learn. To raise a doubt for the purpose of solving it is called to question. To understand thoroughly is called to think. To make fine distinctions is called to analyze. To reach what is actual is called to practice. Although these steps are divided into 5, they may also be regarded collectively, in which case they constitute one and the same step. In short, my doctrine is, mind is identical with reason, or the unity of knowing and doing. Wang's theory of realization of Liang-Chi is another formulation of the principle that knowing and doing are one. He proposes that the term realization be understood as including the sense of carrying out, so that the term covers doing. In Wang's words, Liang-Chi is the compass, the square, and the measure. All things have their individual details, items, contingencies, and changes, just as there are all kinds of circles, squares, and lengths which are testable by the compass, the square, and the measure. The details, items, contingencies, and changes cannot themselves be standardized, precisely as the inexhaustible variety of circles, squares, and lengths cannot themselves be standardized. But let the compass and the square once be established, then all kinds of geometrical figures will be testable, and you can have as many kinds as you like. Let the measure once be established, then you will no more be deceived by the multitude of different lengths. and you can have as many varieties of longness and shortness as you wish. Similarly, let Liang-Qi be established, and you will no more feel uneasy among the vast throng of details, items, contingencies, and changes. You will be equipped to receive as many kinds as you please. A proverb says, a difference of 1 millimeter may make a difference of 1,000 miles. On the basis of the subtle stirrings of Liang-Qi, one can discover whether one is headed towards the right or the wrong, and it is in paying heed to these small warnings that one should be most strict with oneself. On the contrary, if one wishes, as it were, to test a circle or a parallelogram without making use of compasses or a T-square, or if one wishes to determine a length without a measure, one is free to do so, but the results will be nonsense. Still speaking of intuition or conscience, Wang Yang-Ming said, Liang-Qi is a bright mirror in which all images are reflected. Beauty and ugliness will be seen in it, and, after appearing, each will pass. Thus the mirror is forever luminous and shining. The advice derived from Buddhism that mind should be developed without any attachments is in itself sound, for the fact that all images, whether beautiful or ugly, are indiscriminately reflected in the mirror of the mind is in accordance with the proper development of the mind, and the fact that every image, whether beautiful or ugly, after being reflected does not remain, is a sign of non-attachment. Such, for Wang Yang-Ming, is the nature of Liang-Qi, which is conscious, bright, just, and objective. If one can keep Liang-Qi in its pristine condition, it will be a compass and a measure in all emergencies, for it is the storehouse of heavenly reason. Our philosopher-strategist, after his bitter experience in exile, came to the conclusion that the only proper way to conduct one's life is to follow Liang-Qi, a formula which he discovered at the age of 50. There is a record in Wang's biography. After Emperor Wuzong returned to Peking, and after the intrigues of Changchun and Shu Tai, I discovered at last that Liang-Qi is the fundamental factor that makes one risk anything, even unto death. Liang-Qi is a criterion by which one may dare to testify before the three emperors, heaven and earth, the deities, and the sages of generations to come. In a letter to Chu Shouyi in the same year, Wang Yang-Ming wrote, Recently I discovered that realization of Liang-Qi is the true essence of Confucianism. Formerly, I had hesitations on this point, but after many years of bitter experience, I have reached the conclusion that Liang-Qi is that which is self-sufficient in ourselves. It is like the helm on a boat whereby one can steer one's course in calm water or in rapids. When one holds the helm, one is equipped to guide one's bark to safety and to avoid sinking. A disciple of Wang, Cheng-Zhu Chuan, remarked on hearing the master sigh, "Why do you sigh like that?" Wang replied, "This idea, the fundamental character of Liang-Qi, is so simple, yet it was buried for so many ages." The disciple, Chen, continued, "Because the Sung philosophers were busy with their methods of knowledge-seeking, they achieved great erudition, but they also became more and more biased. Now that you, master, have discovered Liang-Qi, you have unfolded the truth for mankind." Wang, the master, added, "It is just like a man who claims to be the descendant of a family after many years' separation. The question can only be settled by a blood test, which will determine the actual relationship between the man and his alleged ancestors. I believe that Liang-Qi is the drop of blood which determines the descendants of the Confucian school." How much importance Wang Yang-Ming attached to the doctrine of Liang-Qi is shown by the passage just quoted, yet he feared that the idea might become crystallized in a catchword and so lose its usefulness for the people. In this anxiety he showed himself to be remarkably far-sighted, for after his death the formula Liang-Qi was, in fact, instrumental in discrediting his philosophy toward the end of the Ming dynasty.